For 30 years, Johnny Carson maintained one of the most carefully crafted public personas in television history. As host of The Tonight Show, he projected warmth, wit, and an easygoing charm that invited millions of viewers to welcome him into their homes each night. This carefully maintained image of affable hospitality masked a far more complex individual, a man who, behind the scenes, harbored deep resentments and maintained legendary feuds that sometimes lasted decades. Johnny had the longest memory in show business, revealed a former NBC executive who worked closely with Carson throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The public saw this warm, welcoming host who seemed to genuinely enjoy everyone who sat on his couch. That was part of his genius as a performer. What they didn't see was his capacity for profound, ice-cold resentment toward people he felt had crossed him. Once you made his enemies list, there was almost no coming back. Carson's ability to compartmentalize these personal animosities while maintaining his professional charm made his rivalries all the more significant. Unlike today's celebrities who air grievances publicly on social media, Carson kept his resentments private, expressing them only to his inner circle while maintaining a studied silence in public that somehow made the feuds even more powerful. Among his most intense and consequential rivalries were 5 that stood out, revealing the true complexity of the man America thought it knew. Perhaps the most painful and personal of Carson's feuds was with Joan Rivers, a protege whose perceived betrayal created a wound so deep that even decades couldn't heal it. The feud between Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers remains one of the most notorious and painful in television history, evolving from mentor and protege to bitter estrangement with no path to reconciliation. Carson had handpicked her, saw something special in her, and gave her exposure on The Tonight Show, eventually calling her his heir apparent. Rivers quickly became a Carson favorite, even serving as his regular guest host, which cemented her as a major comedic voice. Their bond was genuine, both on and off camera. But in 1986, Rivers accepted an offer from Fox to host her own competing late-night show without informing Carson first. To him, that was the ultimate betrayal. Hearing about her new show from a press release rather than from her directly cut deeply. His response was swift and final. Rivers was banned from The Tonight Show, a ban that would last through Jay Leno's tenure and only end when Jimmy Fallon invited her back in 2014. Carson never spoke to her again, even after her husband's death. For him, betrayal of loyalty was unforgivable. Rivers' repeated attempts to apologize fell on deaf ears. Carson once told a friend, "She didn't just stab me in the back, she twisted the knife." The wound never healed, and Rivers remained the only major Tonight Show personality banned for life during Carson's era, proving how deeply he guarded loyalty and how permanently he held grudges. Next came David Letterman, a rivalry that blended admiration with disappointment. Carson respected Letterman's sharp wit and originality and even let him guest host The Tonight Show, a clear mark of approval. But when NBC chose Jay Leno over Letterman to succeed him in 1992, the situation turned complicated. Letterman's angry response and public attacks on NBC and Leno made Carson uncomfortable. Though Carson privately preferred Letterman as his successor, he disapproved of how Letterman handled his disappointment. Johnny came from a generation that believed in handling professional disappointments privately, said one producer. Carson thought Letterman's public venting was undignified and self-defeating. While Carson never publicly took sides, his actions made his preference clear. He secretly sent jokes to Letterman for use in his CBS monologues, and even made his only post-**Tonight Show* appearance on Letterman's program rather than on Leno's. Still, Carson's feelings toward Letterman were mixed, respect for his talent, but disapproval of his bitterness. It perfectly illustrated Carson's dual nature, publicly composed, privately decisive. Then there was Jay Leno, a man Carson never saw as his true successor. Although Leno was the permanent guest host in Carson's later years, that arrangement came from NBC executives, not Carson himself. Johnny never invited him, said one producer. Carson found Leno's humor cheap and lacking warmth. When NBC officially chose Leno over Letterman, Carson was furious but stayed silent to protect The Tonight Show's legacy. His quiet disapproval spoke louder than any public statement. He never appeared on Leno's Tonight Show, choosing instead to support Letterman privately. Carson even sent jokes to Letterman, never to Leno. Behind the scenes, he referred to Leno as a thief with a big chin, exposing a deep personal disdain that contrasted sharply with his public restraint. Despite his feelings, Carson never attacked Leno publicly, proving that for him, protecting the institution mattered more than airing grievances. Carson's dislike for Chevy Chase was more straightforward. Unlike his other rivalries rooted in betrayal or politics, this one came from professional irritation. Carson found Chase arrogant and dismissive during his Tonight Show appearances. Chevy thinks being smug is a personality, Carson once said privately. Chase's sarcasm and unwillingness to engage made him one of Carson's least favorite guests. He even instructed producers never to let Chase guest host, saying, "If I'm sick, don't even book him." To Carson, Chase's attitude disrespected the format he valued so deeply. This wasn't about jealousy or competition, it was about professionalism. Carson believed The Tonight Show deserved respect from its guests, and Chase's behavior showed none. The dislike was mutual and permanent, and Chase's absence from the show in later years made that clear. Finally, Howard Stern represented the complete opposite of everything Carson stood for. Stern mocked Carson relentlessly, calling him old and irrelevant. His shock jock style, crude, provocative, and boundary-pushing, clashed with Carson's belief that entertainment should unite rather than divide audiences. Stern saw Carson as outdated. Carson saw Stern as vulgar. Carson never publicly responded to Stern's attacks, maintaining a silence that only highlighted his disapproval. Privately, he loathed Stern. "He's a bully who confuses cruelty with honesty," Carson once said. To Carson, Stern symbolized the new wave of entertainment that valued shock over wit and confrontation over charm. Their feud wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. Carson represented an era of universal appeal. Stern represented the age of division and controversy. Neither could respect the other without betraying their own principles. Beyond his 5 fiercest rivalries, Carson also had tense relationships with others, though not marked by outright hatred. He viewed Dick Cavett with mild disdain, finding his intellectual tone pretentious. While Carson respected Cavett's intelligence, he disliked the implication that Cavett's Yale-educated sophistication was superior to his own Midwestern accessibility. With Arsenio Hall, Carson was dismissive rather than angry, seeing him as a temporary fad and refusing to acknowledge his success publicly. And with Phil Donahue, Carson simply disagreed philosophically.